Good morning, everyone. Let me welcome everyone to today's Criminal Justice Committee meeting this Wednesday, April the 5th at 10 a.m. We're waiting for a quorum. We'll wait a few minutes, and if we don't get a quorum timely enough, I'll start it as an informational meeting so we can respect people's time. So thank you guys for being here. Good morning, God bless, and happy Easter weekend, everybody. Yes, well, it's gonna rain. Ms. Karen, why don't you do a roll call, and we don't have a quorum. We'll start the meeting to respect everyone's time.
Roll call. Councilmember Thomas,
Present.
Councilmember Moreno, Councilmember Morel, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember King. We have a quorum.
First item on the agenda.
We have approval of the minutes of the March 7th, 2023 meeting.
So moved. Second by Councilmember Moreno. All in favor? 3 yeas, no nays. It's approved.
Next item is a presentation from the New Orleans United Front People's Assembly Crime Summit.
I
Presenting
want
the
to
findings.
take this opportunity to thank there've been crime plans. Everybody's been calling for crime plans, this agency, that agency, but ultimately, the only way crime really works is when the community is involved and has a plan. So I want to thank the United Front for what they've been doing to meet with different aspects of the community to come up with their own plan to help with what we're doing, not just with law enforcement, so that the community can be safe. So I want to invite Mr. Parker, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Baptiste, Mr. Crawford, and any others you guys have to start your presentation, please. And if you guys, for folk who may not know what the United Front is, if you could give an overall view, what is the United Front, why this initiative, and how the community was evolved, and then you can start your presentation. Like I know I have a copy already. You should have copies. I think Mr. Ball, you gave the clerk, yeah, so we all have copies of the plan. So whoever's going to leave the presentation to talk about the United Front, why this effort, and then the presentation can be started. Mr. Johnson, you going to take the lead?
Yeah.
All right.
Want to thank you, Council Member Thomas, for giving us the opportunity to make this presentation. As you are aware, we held a summit Crime Summit at Cafe Istanbul in January.
Yes.
You were there. And we appreciate your attendance along with Councilmember King. The purpose for that, for the New Orleans United Front is an umbrella grassroots organization that has developed over the years, beginning back in around 2012, with the denial of the president of the NAACP being allowed to attend a public meeting. We organized there to protest that. And from there, we have grown to be a organization with concerns to the people in New Orleans, specifically the Black community of New Orleans. So that's where our focus is, and that's the work that we're doing. We're a non-funded organization, all volunteer, and we raise the necessary revenue in order for us to do the work that we do. So we want to thank the council for taking time and noticing the work that we have made available to the city thus far. On January the 23rd, New Orleans United Front held a People's Assembly Crime Summit to encourage the citizens of New Orleans to express their concerns and offer solutions to the longstanding problems of crime and murder within the city of New Orleans. Today, the New Orleans United Front is offering the results of that crime summit to City Council. The main area of concern will illuminate before you today. Mr. Edward Parker will cover the concerns of resources not reaching the people of New Orleans through cooperative business investments. Mr. Leon Shabazz and Ms. Annette Cranford will cover the concerns of our youth not being considered and supplied with proper programming and guidance. Mr. Gary Ballier Jr. will report on the necessity of involving the citizenry in safe, responsible firearm ownership through education. As an addendum to the report, it is vital to express the need for all aspects of New Orleans to buy into the uplifting of the values and responsibilities of citizenship. But most importantly, for the officials and professional members of New Orleans not to separate themselves from the people of New Orleans as elitists. This is a genuine need for those who look upon themselves as being special to gravitate back to earth. After 247 years of America being an incorporated body, it has been well established that fear is not a deterrent to crime anymore. The attempts of weaponizing fear and incarceration have failed in America. The facts are with certainty. Ignorance creates curiosity, and curiosity without being channeled creates chaos and confusion. Education should not be limited to the classrooms only. Teachers should be every able-bodied man, woman, and child in New Orleans who has a basis of knowledge that increases citizens' productivity. If we see ourselves as being related to one another, we see ourselves as family. It is going to take a family to build and keep New Orleans safe and productive. In 2023, scientists have found stress as being one of the main factors in creating chaos and confusion, while mental health suffers because of the denial of mental health being real. New Orleans United Front strongly suggests any crime plan include a huge consideration for the treatment of mental health. Let me be clear. The consent decree cannot be finalized until the NOPD satisfactorily reaches all benchmarks. Special attention must be paid to Hans Guther in a top position of NOPD. There is no speculating that Hans has racist and biased tendencies towards the Black population of New Orleans. This is no way to demonstrate a willingness to bring about change in the NOPD. We will now go to our first speaker, Mr. Edward Parker.
Mr. Parker.
Thank you very much, Council, and especially our esteemed District E Councilman. Thank you very much. Crime in New Orleans has a Black face. This city is 60% Black, but most of our Black community lives at or below the poverty level. Poverty and crime go hand in hand. To solve this problem, we, the New Orleans United Front, looked at the disparity study done between 2017 and 2018. This study was commissioned by the city. This study shows the lack of economic opportunity for Black businesses in this city. Black vendors do very little business with the city and almost none in the private sector. This disparity has to stop. There is something systemically wrong with New Orleans contracting. Our Black businesses are being left out of the process, and we ask, why and how? We, the New Orleans United Front, encourage you, our present council, to look at the disparity study and make the necessary changes to level the business playing field for our Black businesses. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr. Parker.
now have Leon Shabazz and Annette Cranford.
Ms. Cranford,
Good morning, Council. I'm here today to speak to you about,
put the mic down, please.
that better?
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Council. I'm here today to speak to you about our youth, in particular, our young girls. So often we hear about programs for our young boys and young men, not so much our girls and young women. Our girls need as much support as our boys. I'm going to use an example, the young ladies involved in the Linda Fricky murder. Those young ladies were involved in a horrific situation, and we have no idea what drove them to participate in such a heinous act. We need activities in our communities for our young people to get guidance, mentorship, tutoring, development, counseling, social networking, and training. We are here today because our city is in dire need of help. The remedy needs to start with our children because no matter what, they are our future. They need to know we care about their well-being, and I'm depending on them knowing that they can get education and have successful futures. I have a nonprofit organization, Pretty Patty's Pretty Girls Club. I started this organization in hopes of reaching out to as many young girls as possible and mentor them. I've had to take off some time because of the illness, but I started it again. We want to give them the confidence they may need to push harder to improve their environment and go for their goals. There is a whole world awaiting them, and they don't even know the boundaries they can conquer. My plea to you today, City Council, is to help organizations such as Pretty Patty's Pretty Girls Club succeed. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cranford. Mr. Shabazz.
Thank you for committee for allowing me to speak. The solution to solving the juvenile crime in New Orleans is to undo the institutional racist policies that the council and the city of New Orleans passed after post-Hurricane Katrina, such as blight, slaughter charter schools, and the so-called pay-to-play public-private partnership NORD that negatively impacts our children and their parents, along with the inadequate, inhumane housing. Our children and their parents deserve the same quality of life as the other ethnic groups benefiting from the legal, illegal, immoral land grab. Some of the solutions are, we want an end to the capitalist takeover and domination of our New Orleans schools, that the council and the mayor office denounce the failed experiment and demand that New Orleans School Board take back their constitutional power to govern their schools. We want an educating system for our children that teaches them about their true history, and the role in the present day society, including the indigenous part of New Orleans, Louisiana, and the African part of New Orleans history. To develop and defend Black youth by pushing our direct and indirect tax dollars that we pay to the city of New Orleans by allocating and going directly to our youth and their parents, funding education and training with decent pay and an ability towards self-determination by doing for self in a community way. And at last, and the most important, proper diagnosis for mental illness. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder versus behavior diagnosis. And let's discuss the differences. Behavior diagnosis fund the system, the courts, psychiatrists, which tend to sway toward the courts, the different counselor groups and nonprofits that get paid to make sure your child don't never get fixed. Whereas on the contrary, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it funds the parent, empowers the child, gets real diagnosis. I'm gonna tell you, I had my children. A lot of you know I had my children,
Yeah.
and I got them. I had to leave New Orleans to get the proper diagnosis for them. Once they got that proper PTSD diagnosis, my babies, I got one graduate from Xavier. She in Manhattan right now. I got one about to leave UNO. I got two at Southern, the twins at Southern. I got the other set of twins. Well, the oldest, he graduated from Southern. He's in Houston. I got the other set of twins. They at LSU, and I got one left, senior in high school. And it's because I got the proper diagnosis for them. And I'm asking this body to really reconsider that and to push those issues in terms of the health. Well, I don't know if she's here or not. Not to look at that, really look at the PTSD and how those behavior, all them kids getting this behavior diagnosis. You want to fix the crime and this so-called, another thing they're using, conflict resolution. That's a behavior diagnosis. Our children and their parents, and probably some of y'all suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Just let Margaret say, we got a storm coming. Watch how y'all get to sweating and running to the store buying stuff. And thank you for taking and listening to me.
Thank you, Reverend Leon.
All right.
Mr. Biden,
Good morning, Council.
good morning.
I'm here today to appeal to you for support for firearms education in our community. Coupled with more mental health and social services, this could greatly reduce the number of unfortunate incidents involving firearms. You see, we can't legislate our way out of this problem. We have to eliminate by education, increase knowledge, decrease mishaps. What we see now in our Black communities nationwide, especially in urban areas, is a result of years of trial and errors with firearms use, misuse. Historically, we have not been taught the proper way to own and handle firearms safely and correctly. Whereas the number of firearms in America is over 400 million, and they have been used here for over 400 years, the Black population has only recently had the right to keep and bear arms. The Second Amendment really didn't apply to us prior to the mid-60s. So it's reasonable to say that Blacks are infants compared to non-Blacks when it comes to our firearms culture. Yet we seem to be most adversely affected, and it's mainly due to a lack of exposure, inexperience, and a lack of education with firearms. To our demise, those are some of the root causes. Add to this a poor education system, poverty, environmental stress, misinformation, and a dismantling of our mental health, social service systems by previous governor. And you have the perfect storm for issues, especially with our youth with firearms. We are quick to say accidental discharge, but in most cases, it is negligence by the handler. Negligence due to not being educated, trained, or experienced. At some point, we have to be honest. We need more firearms information, education, and training available to the community. New laws, ordinances, and rules alone will not do it. Those only adversely affect the poor and underserved. I appeal to you to promote and fund more mental health and social services, because when there's a firearms death, it is usually because that person had a mental health issue or a bad social situation. We have universities in our city with students studying in those disciplines. We could flood our streets with help if we really wanted to. Let's approach our higher learning institutions here and ask for help. Encourage folks with firearms to seek training, make it available to folks that think they cannot afford it. We, the New Orleans United Front, are here to help and want partnerships for solutions. Let's do some real common sense changes with firearms education, information, and training. We have a 350-year gap to bridge. Now, thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I wanted to say that we tried to keep the presentation as short as possible, but we have included in our written documents the information that you might not have heard. And I strongly suggest that you look at this and take it in, because there's a lot of time that has gone into this. We have looked in the past to see that you have spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars for studies that end up not even being considered or used in any way. So we leave it up to you. We're ready for questions.
No, Chair, I'll yield to my colleagues on this, questions or comments from any of my council members. No one's logged in yet. Okay, Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Ms. Crawford, I agree with you. We need more programming for young women. We're seeing justice involve women more frequently now. And that's something that I know Council Vice President Moreno and I have been talking about. I'm actually doing a young women's leadership academy in connection with Loyola, but it's from 18 to 22, which is a little too young, too old. I think we need to reach down younger. And so I'm happy to work with you and talk about how we can really have programming for our young women. My friend Nikita Shavers has a great program for young women. I just met with Girls on the Run. And so there are programs out there, but we just need to put our arms around them and make sure that young women know about these programs in our community. But I absolutely agree. On the gun safety, we've talked about this previously. I know you put on classes in the community, and that's fantastic. I would invite you on April 15th. We're doing a gun lock giveaway and some demonstrations with ATF at Dryades YMCA. So I'll get with you and we'll talk about that.
Okay, to address the gun lock giveaway, giving somebody a gun lock that can't render the firearm safe and properly manipulated could in some cases be putting them in trouble. The gun lock part, lock it up, is good, but without the other things that go along with firearms ownership, you're kind of missing it. I mean, I know there's money for that, the gun lock part, but in addition to that, a basic firearms
Training. Yeah.
coupled with the gun lock thing. If you just give away a lock, that's only a piece of it.
It's not just a giveaway. This is not just a giveaway. That's why I want to talk with you after about how we can partner with that.
I've been to a couple of gun lock giveaways, and in most cases, people go away with more questions than there's answers to, because the people doing the gun lock giveaway are not well versed. I mean, I don't want to challenge anybody here on your experience with firearms, but I'm involved to, well, there's a misunderstanding because the Black community doesn't have the experience and exposure. So when they hear it coming from you as legislators talking about firearms, they think you're coming from a place of experience. And it's not always the case. I mean, I know, I've grown up in Albert Thomas. I know his experience with firearms. But there's, Black people have always feared firearms because we've always been on the wrong end of it. For the last 50 years, we've had the right to keep and bear arms, but we didn't catch up with proper training.
Absolutely.
That's why you have the grandmother with the gun under the pillow and the kid gets shot, or the kid have access to me. We just don't know. We have to admit that we don't know, and to exclude us by over-regulating us, or putting too many laws and rules in place instead of putting the education in place. I'm part of a group, not this group, I'm part of a group that has met for the third Saturday of every month, free. Anybody who show up and you have questions, we can answer them. And I don't want to pick, but I went to events sponsored by a city agency, and I watch people leave and come to us after, asking us to answer the questions that they had. I would happily add to what the city's doing, supplement that to stay behind after those giveaways are done and answer those questions and provide guidance and free training in some instances.
I'll take you up on that offer on April 15th. So we'll talk about it.
I won't make them do an FBI Citizens Academy.
Oh, man. Well, let's talk for future events.
Councilmember Marino, and followed by Councilmember Morrell.
I just want to follow up on what you were speaking about. You're so spot on the training piece. And I can tell you this, that when it comes to women getting any training, it's just not happening. And I can tell you that women appear to be buying more firearms because of what's happening, with violent crime in the city. Yet they're not getting the training. And so whatever we can do to also kind of, hone in on making sure that women are receiving this training, I think it's key, because I think often, maybe with men, you may have a father-son type of situation. The father teaches the son about responsible gun ownership, that type of thing. But I think it's more rare for a father to teach the daughter, but then they grow up, they get a firearm because they're scared of whatever may be happening, and they don't have the proper training, which makes me pivot over to you, Ms. Crawford, about once again, focusing in on women, focusing in on really our girls.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, I was just telling Chief Woodfork, who's with us today. Thank you, Chief, for being with us for this important meeting and for listening to the community members here. I was just telling Chief Woodfork that I was glad to see that midnight basketball is coming back. And I think people need to be aware that midnight basketball is just not a bunch of people playing basketball, a bunch of kids playing basketball. There are a lot of resources that come into this particular program, educational resources, workforce opportunities, like all of that is part of midnight basketball. But while that is a great program, it's mostly focused on the boys. So I just talked to Chief about, Chief, what can we do to focus on the girls? And Chief, I very much appreciate, you committing to work with my office and to get your team together to figure out what that could be. Ms. Crawford, I'd love to loop you in to see what we can figure out, what fits best for the community, what fits best for our girls. I was never a tremendous athlete, so maybe it's not necessarily sports related, but
Right.
something
Yeah.
for the girls. I love sports. I think most people see me like cheering on the LSU women's
I was
basketball,
about- Look at our girls at LSU.
There you go.
Championship for the first time. I mean, they need
Absolutely.
to be included as well.
Yes, and I'll say this, on LSU women's basketball, I am talking to the team about figuring out how we can do some type of community event
Okay.
for the kids here in New Orleans. It'd be great to focus in on girls, and maybe from that we can maybe launch something. Anyway, now I'm just brainstorming on the dais. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. But Ms. Crawford, I'd love to get with you after this. And Chief, we'll move forward on brainstorming on ideas, but it's so long overdue. It is so needed, and it's time to get it done.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
I remember Chief speak this. I remember the PALS program, and it was majority boys. I think it was a buddy of mine grew up with Lloyd Clark, instrumental in the PALS. If we could have a similar program targeting our young ladies, it
Yeah.
could mean a lot. It would improve the relations with the police department and
Yeah.
the community by going in the community and inviting those girls to a PALS type program.
Okay, that's awesome. I just had one more comment on the workforce piece because that is so important as well. I wanted to say that Suneva Lavasso, who is the Director of Economic Development and Workforce Development for the city, she actually has come up with a really great plan to utilize ARPA dollars, federal dollars, for boosting some workforce initiatives within the city. Currently, they're not funded, but I'm working with her to figure out a path to fund those. She's going to do a presentation before the Economic Development Committee that I chair on the 25th. So you may all want to be here to watch her presentation. She's going to go over like 20 different items that she thinks would be really important to boost workforce and job opportunities for the people in the city.
Okay.
Councilman Burrell.
Thank you. I have very little to add to what my colleagues have already said. I do want to note one thing, which included in your packet, which talks about the disparities, particularly when it comes to construction contracts. I think that's something that isn't highlighted enough, is that we as a council have really been on top of the fact that our DB office is kind of failing and really not making an effort to make sure that disadvantaged business entities, and by that in particular, African-American owned disadvantaged business entities, are having a real seat at the table. I think it's especially egregious how often the city preemptively waives the requirement for DBE participation. I've always been not a huge fan of that very weak best faith effort to try and find a DBE partner, because the bar is so low. It's like, I called my cousin and he said he couldn't, so I tried. And the DBE office does not do enough to say, we have a published list. Did you go through the entire list? Did you contact every eligible group, and did they give you a response? It would be very simple just for someone, this is really basic, to have an affidavit requirement from a contractor saying, I went to the DBE list, I contacted all the firms that were eligible and none of them were interested, and then say, after I've completed and good faith effort with an affidavit with receipts that no one was able to participate, then look at a waiver. But right now, the way these waivers are being put out there, it's like the moment that a contract's let, there's a waiver following right behind it. And from the city's position, if we're preemptively waiving DBE participation, we cannot look at our community with a straight face and say that contractors aren't trying if we aren't even requiring them to pretend like they're trying to do that work. So I think it's something that the council is going to have to take up and address. I think we're going to have to look at what the DBE policy is as far as procurement, because what is the point of having a qualified list? And being a qualified DB provider is not easy. Going through that entire process, being put on that list with the expectation that you'll get opportunities, and then the city continually waiving the requirement to do so, it's worse than lying to someone. It's making them go through a tremendous amount of effort when you have no intention of actually following through. So that's something the council is going to work on. Absolutely.
If I could respond to that,
Mr. Johnson.
You're bringing up a very vital point. In our research, we looked at the Morial administration because they did so much to eliminate and reduce crime and murder in New Orleans. And something that is so outstanding in what happened was the fact that the mayor worked in tandem with city council and got the legislation necessary to put things in motion to get them done. And once they did that, they would come back to make sure that things were being attended to properly. And I think while council is considering a lot of things, they need to consider the enforcement piece as well. Because without enforcement, we're nowhere. We're where we started.
And also, I'm
Mr. Parker.
sorry, we would like to thank you present council members and Councilperson Moreno. We saw the report card part that the collaborative came before you and got passed. Look, thank you very much for that, because that is an ordinance that's already on the books that has not been followed. And that Office of Supplier Diversity, you guys have to take a look at what they're doing, whether they need more people or what. And you also have to look at these DBEs who are being used by the primes. They're not doing the work. They're being used by the prime, and that does not help our Black businesses. What you call it, the pass-throughs have to be
That's an
stopped.
interesting point, Mr. Barr, because I will tell you, that's something in my brief time when I was in the private sector between being a senator, being a council member, and I would try to work with trying to place DBs in a variety of different situations. You would have qualified DBs who would respond to an offer to be a DB partner, and they'd say, listen, we just want your name on this contract. It says you're going to get 4 positions. I'm going to give you 1, and we could do the other 3 in-house, and I'm just going to pay you some money on the side. But the whole point of a DB program, which is why you grow out of them, is that you take a disadvantaged business, you help them find opportunity, and then at some point they be able to compete with the primes and grow to a point where they're a successful business on their own. And the problem you have is when you don't check the receipts, you don't make sure that the DBs that are being involved are able and willing to do the work, is that you allow a perpetuation of a model where the DBs are just pass-throughs, to your point, where you have certain DBs, when you see the same DB pop up on 20 different projects and that program, they're doing the same work for 20 years and they've never become a prime, that in itself should kind of be a red flag. If you've been doing this same kind of work, you're an expert in that field, and you're never a prime, somebody's going to check the receipts and go, hey, if you guys have been a partner and you have this much experience, why hasn't your company grown? Because you're supposed to eventually graduate from the program so that other DBs behind you can take advantage. You shouldn't be parked on the list as a DB pass-through, taking up space where new DBs don't have the opportunity to grow and compete. So I hear you on that. I know Councilman Moreno's worked with the collaborative previously on that, and I'd love to work with y'all as well to figure out how we can look into the office and how we can reform that, because to your point, during the Morial administration, you saw a tremendous amount of growth in the Black middle class.
That's right.
And since the Morial administration, you have seen no growth,
That's right.
if not a reversal of the Black middle class. And a lot of that is because there were advantages in contracting as a DB to grow and create a company. And once you took your foot off the gas and started pumping the brake, everything stopped. So I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Yes, Brother Shabazz, before we go to our speakers, and all of our speakers have 2 minutes, but Mr. Shabazz,
Yeah,
before we go to our
I want
speakers.
to commend them, for that effort, loopholes, since I've been growing up my life and I've studied government, entities and agencies, loopholes. And I guess you can try to close all the loopholes. There's no compliance, what you can do. Now, being I did 12 years in the military and I did 12 years with the Department of Veteran Affairs, we had the OIG. What role do the OIG play in New Orleans in closing those, in terms of compliance? Do they oversee, make sure compliance in place? I think that maybe y'all need to look at forming that, adding that to the policies.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the interesting things in this community, even from our media, they'll investigate political corruption, they'll investigate crime, but when you talk about economic corruption and disparity, you don't see the special on that.
Exactly.
You don't see the special on our community not getting the money it deserves. I mean, they'll nab a politician, they'll nab an agency head, but very rarely will you see our media dedicate much of their investigations and much of their time to the economic disparities. So, so maybe that'll happen one day. Councilmember Green.
I appreciate you all being here today with your presentation, and I look forward to working with you more. No brag, just fact. I was the head of small business development under Morial and was the head of economic development under Morial. And we did deliberately work to build a stronger African-American middle class. But one of the things that we did quietly was sometimes if the requirements weren't met, we just wouldn't do that work. And then the message gets out that at the end of the day, you need to find a disadvantaged business enterprise to partner with to get that work done. Yeah, I've only been here, in this position a year, and that was 25 years ago that I was the head of economic development. But as we have that discussion, one of the things that you can hold over the contracting community is that it's not so important that we get it done if we don't get it done with participation by minority and women-owned businesses. And that is something that sometimes isn't necessarily within the purview of the council, but something that we can continue to emphasize. And maybe as we go forward, we recognize that maybe that particular job is so symbolically important that until you come back with the DBE who's going to participate, it just won't get done. Just food for thought as to how we could potentially move forward on having the participation levels increased. Because I think that there's always a sense too often that there's urgency in getting it done, and the city's going to get it done no matter how. We're going to waive the DBE requirement. We're going to waive the other requirements because we have to get it done. Maybe we don't have to get it done
Yes,
if we're not doing it right. I'm gonna just leave that out there.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our first speaker is Mr. Keith Hudson. Mr. Hudson.
I ain't gonna take up y'all too much of y'all time because I don't have a TV show and I don't have a personal relationship with the city council. But we're gonna give you a history lesson on Keller. Since 2005, I've been trying to get a city-owned community center open to stop the thing that we're talking about right now today with the youth. So far, the only obstacle has been city officials. Since 2005. Now that's a crime because my community provides the most prisons in the state of Louisiana, just my neighborhood, where that center should be at. So when we talk about youth, violence, mental health, if the kids don't have a place of refuge, where they gonna find it at? In the street. And the ones that's in the street, they didn't make it in prison. So they're trying to be a man on the street. So they bucking these kids up to do crazy things. Now, I've been out there since 2005. I haven't got any support. None. Zero. So when you talk about crime, talk about the real crime against my neighborhood, Central City. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Next speaker is Mr. Michael Willis.
How y'all doing?
Good morning, Mr. Willis.
Morning.
And great event last weekend, man. The kids thoroughly enjoyed it. It was packed and people came out. It was a wonderful community event.
I appreciate you from coming out. Again, I'm not the kind of person that like to throw the stones at nobody. We got to figure out solutions. So I'll come to you all again, tell y'all again 1,000 times over. I'm here for you all. You all are citizens, just like I'm a citizen. It's because you said at a certain job position, don't change the nature of what we're dealing with. When we're talking about kids, crime, I've been to over 70 funerals last year, 5 this year. This is my reality. My reality might not be what everybody else's reality is. So what I did was I also put a funeral home on the news with me so that they can talk about all the things that we're seeing going on in our community, because everybody telling me that's not so. So I guess my numbers ain't right. The funeral home numbers ain't right, but it is my reality. So I'm willing to partner with any of you all, do what I can with everyone to find ways to curb violent crime and also save lives. If this continue to happen, we're not only gonna lose residents, we're gonna lose business. We lose businesses, that means what, New Orleans is gonna be redeveloped with out-of-town businesses coming here to make money off the culture and everybody that ran away from the city. So we gotta figure out what we're gonna do. We dropped the ball. How we gonna re-educate and reintroduce some of these old ideas, implement some twists from the new ideas, and really follow through with them. We are dealing with a lot of tragedies, a lot of trauma. Like everybody's saying that everybody deal with things differently. Pressure does bust pipes. We need to really figure out how to get on top of this. together, not divided. I mean, everybody been throwing their shots, and that's great. But if the community don't see us coming together, don't see the council coming together, the government coming together, everybody worldwide, we're on a worldwide stage, first of all. We're looking like we're a joke. So whatever I can do to play a part with strategic planning, follow-up, have a team that's willing to do the work as well, I'm here for you all right?
Thank
So
you.
it's not about what you all can do for me. I'm asking you all, what can I do for y'all?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can duplicate an event that you had throughout the city. That would be a solution. I know we're gonna do it, but we're gonna talk to you about how we do it in District E because the amount of the kids that came out was tremendous. Thank you. Thank you. Next is Mr. George Mahdi, Brother Mahdi. Followed by Brother Chewy.
George Mahdi, Neighborhood Unity and Merge. We talked about this several times before. You know, these problems start at the cradle, not the grave. And we can't solve these problems on the back end. We have to solve these problems on the front end. You know, and that means study, that means examining the problems and putting forth effort to solve them. Examining social and political factors that result in crime. We're talking about the matrix of race, economics, and education. The answer is, the real answer to this problem is education and opportunity. It hasn't changed, but we need to look at these things in the historical perspective. You know, we're dealing with a history of oppression and racism, herding Black people into and controlling them. That's been the history of New Orleans, Louisiana, and other places, because crime is happening in other big cities, and you know, it's going to continue because we're not trying to solve the problems that cause that. We're moving people out of the neighborhoods and eliminating the schools out the neighborhoods. You know, gentrification has eliminated the Black neighborhood, but gentrification hasn't changed the factors that cause the social problems that are still in the Black neighborhood. And this is why we have the disparities in incarceration and crime statistics that keep happening. And that's another thing that we have to look at. Look at the 60s, the Kerner report. This happened then in the 60s. And they found that the reason for the riots was because of racism. See, okay, and then what happened in the 80s under Reagan, the war on drugs? They said that the people, young Black people were gangbangers, and they were the problem, and they start putting all of them in jail. And look what you're starting in now. Keep talking about putting juveniles in jail.
Thank you.
So solve the problem by going to the roots of it and changing the conditions, providing more jobs, opportunities, and especially do something about the education problem, because that's what we're going to need to change it if you want it changed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahdi. Mr. Clark, Brother Chewy.
As always, my name is Albert Chua Clark. I'm always here representing three groups. One of them is Neighborhood Unity, the other is Merge Mobilization, Racism and Government Everywhere. Other is POCC, Prison Conscious Committee. Again, this is a hell of an occasion. Y'all need to put on events like this every month, if not every day. In reference to so-called crime problem. It is a crime problem. But we definitely like to make sure that y'all focus on the NOPD, them gangsters, those individuals who work totally against our community. They're part of the problem. They're a major part of the problem. They're the biggest gang in New Orleans. I know y'all don't want to hear it, but we trying to tell you the truth. Now the people feel, and I hate to really, in a sense, get off what I really want to say, but I put out several complaints against NOPD, of lately, had the I can't think of the name of the group, but anyhow, again, I filed several complaints against them, you know, I mean, they just transgress, you know, our person every step of the way. But I just wanted to make that clear, you know, because, you know, normally we just come here to talk about what's happening to our community. I think it's important to reflect on them, you know, as it relates to us, you know, because, you know, we filed several complaints against them for just, you know, walking over us. You know? But then we definitely like to just point out the issue in reference to the crime phenomenon, you know, especially as it relates to our young people. And I know y'all talk about the gun problem, you know, but a lot of our young people who are being accused of, you know, guns and gun related type incidents, a lot of them are exploiting the moment right now, you know, in reference to the Second Amendment. You know, the Second Amendment benefit white folks, you know, and white America, you know, and a lot of our young people, they see that loophole, so they get their gun, and I would encourage to get their gun, you know, because at some point in time, we're gonna have to do, you know, pitch battle with white supremacy. Yeah, you know, I mean, with same thing that happened, you know, in Yugoslavia, you know, they're gonna happen here in America, you know, and I know a lot of y'all don't want to hear it, you know, think, well, you know, Chewy just talking out of his mind. No, we trying to tell you what we see, you know, and just so important that our young people, you know, instead of them getting guns, you know, deal with their selfish interest, that they get guns to protect our community.
Thank you. Thank you. Any online comments? No online comments. First, Mr. Clark, history proves Mr. Shuey right. When there's not fairness, when there's economic depravity, when there's disparity from 17th century France to every period up until now, it highlights the level of anarchy when people are not considered, when people are not respected, and when people are not involved. First of all, I want to thank you guys. This committee, and we've been focused so much on crime from what law enforcement does. And when I read the report, it was so comprehensive. It was from economic development to housing, to our kids, to public policy. I just thought it would be important for the community to hear the work that had been done. I have consistently, you know, said since I've been here, I've highlighted the past. I've been chuckled at and made fun of it sometimes, talking about the 90s and how old I am and how long I've been around, and I understand that. But I would say during those times, Mr. Johnson, 41% growth in housing that we hadn't achieved, 65% reduction in violent crime. I've said that here before, said that at our meetings before, 63% reduction in violent crime, conflict resolution task force that was city-wide, a partnership agreement with the city and the school, so that any school that had a park near it, Memorial and council had an agreement with that school. The African-American middle class was growing then. And it's not to say that everything from the old works, but if it worked, why not go back to it? And then when you talk about economic development, one of the biggest tragedies has been when you study that. That's why it's important to know the history of this city. That's why it's important to study it, because we can know, you know, I got to know what I did wrong, try to do something right. When you look at the history of the city economically, it is sad, especially where we are with the dominant population. And there's no place in the world where your majority population has our poverty statistics that's going to be safe. You may be a tourist destination, but don't go 4 blocks this way, or don't go 4 blocks that way. And I think our city is better than that. And then the other thing is that there's been a lot of work Mr. Parker done behind the scenes, not publicly, but that's some of the research that my staff and some of the folk in here are doing on who does business. That's hundreds of companies. It's going to be even more. And we're going to go back to see who's done business and how much and where. I can highlight some of that stuff now, but I want to wait until it's complete. What DBEs have been DBEs on the surface, but not DBEs in terms of who they hire and who they do business with. There are few. There are few. What DBEs are African American and which ones are white female
Mhm.
Right.
That's right.
that qualify as DBE.
Loophole.
There has to be a more intense study than just talking about it and saying, we're gonna take a look at it. No, we're gonna put a microscope on it. We're gonna look at all those companies that have benefited over the last several decades. And hopefully, when that study, that work is done, we can take a look at who's taken advantage of the system, who's benefited from the system, because there are some DBE companies that if you go to their office, they don't have any DBEs working for them.
Yes. Yes.
They don't have any African-American young men and women that even they employ. And they'll complain about getting contracts, but when their subs aren't women or minority contractors, but they'll come and complain about getting contract. I think it's time that we put the microscope to that. And I think what you guys, Crime Plan did, Mr. Johnson would say that we're not going to be safe unless every element of this city is a reflection of justice and a reflection of fairness. And what I'm going to do with this committee now, and hopefully my colleagues will agree, we have focused on crime and criminal justice and all the components of the criminal justice agency. But I think it's equally important if we're going to deal with crime, that Supply Diversity come here and talk about the role that they're playing in crime reduction. That housing come here and talk about the role that they're playing in crime reduction. And that all of these other agencies, what is your crime reduction plan? So I know I got an amen from my council vice president. Hopefully, moving forward, every meeting, the questions that you guys have raised in this comprehensive plan, from NORA to others, they will come here to report how have they impacted and reduced crime. Mr. Johnson, I'll let you close out.
Thank you very much. And I would like to just mention the fact that I was at the Hanno meeting last week, and they voted on several contracts that they were going to give out. And the question I had is, how many of these contractors that you're voting on have a DBE program? And they couldn't tell me. They have to put it off to the meeting in April to be able to tell me what the DBE status of the people that they just awarded contracts to, which I think is going out the world backwards. But I want to thank the council. I want to thank the fact that you have your ear to the ground and listening to find out what's going on and what can happen. If we don't have the participation, we cannot see and understand change. And I know we have the police chief here, and I would just like to say, unless we see some kind of change, some kind of innovation coming into NOPD, we're stuck in yesteryears as far as the NOPD is concerned. Now, I would like to invite the council out to our continuing program of the New Orleans United Front Town Hall meeting on crime, which will happen April 10th, next Monday, from 6 to 8 at Cafe Istanbul. And we're asking you to come out because people will come out. They're coming out so that they can refine the plan that we've given to you.
Thank you.
And we thank you for this opportunity. And if you, we can be of any more assistance, please let us know.
If we move forward, we'll continue to get updates on the report and the summit meetings you guys have. Thank y'all. I had a Mr. D. Collins who filled out a card. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Denise Collins. And I am here
Yeah, Ms. Collins.
speaking on behalf of all our youth on the same matter that these folks just spoke on. On my way here this morning, I noticed a young man while I was on a bus, not too eager to get to the bus stop, but I'm assuming he's on his way to school because he's in uniform and he has this backpack on. Length in his hair. Face looked like it hadn't been washed because he probably rushed out of the door. Running out the door to go catch the bus that's gonna pass in front of the school that's in his community. Y'all have to make this make sense to me. Make this make sense to me. This child have to go catch a bus where he gonna ride an hour to get to school. And there's a school 2 minutes away from his house. That's no longer a school. You know something I want to say to Miss Moreno? You know, I call your office and I speak to you. You rush me off the phone. You talk fast to me and I assume you're busy. I know y'all have jobs and y'all have things to do. And to y'all, I'm nobody. It probably doesn't matter what I'm about to say. But you've turned all our schools, the Orleans Parish School Board first has failed our children. They failed our children since I was in school, middle school, Moton School, not the new Moton School, the old Moton School that's built on top of the toxic landfill in the Desire Project. They've been failing them ever since then. But this child looked like he was I hurt for him this morning. I really did. I felt so sorry for this child. The real estate company, every time you say regentrification, urban renewal, all that means is get the rest of these Black people out of these economic neighborhoods so we could finish building up and putting all our $399,000 into their community. That's all that means to me. Because now his mama probably have this girl homeless, can't find a home, not a decent home. His mama got to go to work, or his mama dead, or his mama moved to Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, and now he here with his grandmother, who's an elderly person, haven't seen outside in months because they're afraid to come out. Y'all need to do better. And I feel like, don't say thank you to me like that, because I feel like you're cutting me off.
No, your time, I'm just letting you know
Y'all
your
need to
time
do
was
something
up.
about that time too, because it takes more. It's gonna take a whole lot more time to get this straight. We losing our children, they dying, they dead. These children not crazy.
Yes,
Y'all
ma'am.
need to do better.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ms. Karen, next item on the agenda.
We have a presentation from the Violent Crime Reduction Task Force with Tyrell Morris, the Executive Director of the Orleans Parish Communications District and Chairman of the Violent Crime Reduction Task Force.
Present yourself and start your presentation when you're ready, please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, council members. Good morning, members of the public. My name is Tyrell Morris. I'm the Executive Director of the Orleans Parish Communication District. I also serve as the Chairman of the Violent Crime Reduction Task Force. My purpose here today is to provide a public update on the actions of the task force and receive questions from council to help you understand what our actions have been and what the results we're beginning to see on the ground. So I'll go through the presentation. I'll take questions either at the end or as we go along. As we all know, on January 11th, Mayor Cantrell issued an executive order creating the Violent Crime Reduction Task Force. This came after the end of the year stats showed us breaking recent trends and having alarming rates of violence in the city. Also, the first 10 days of the year proved to be very bloody. So the task force was created to be a coordinating entity of existing city resources to ensure that all the agency heads that had responsibility or resources to responding to violent crime were doing so towards one common goal, leaving no stone unturned. The task force broke our work into 3 different areas: 1, prevention, apprehension, and wraparound services for victims. I want to take a moment to just provide the public an update on the public available stats provided by the New Orleans Police Department last Wednesday. They actually released updated numbers an hour ago before this presentation. I'm in no way saying that we are out of this violent crime crisis, no whatsoever. We still have a lot of work to do, but I do think it's important to share the information with the public as we go through the work. The NLPD collectively is reporting a 20% reduction in persons crime, and I've listed the individual areas on the slide. The information is released weekly by the superintendent's office at the NLPD. And again, the department just released its latest update about an hour ago. But the stats provided today go through March 25th of this year. First, our first order of business was to prevent acts of violent crime. And we wanted to do that by making the environmental conditions as pleasant as possible. So there has been a creative and incredible effort to remove contributors to violence. One being blighted property, repairing streetlights, and the removal of junk and abandoned vehicles or hazardous vehicles. At our very first task force meeting, the NLPD advised that there was a connection with violent crime, with abandoned and junk vehicles being used to store drugs and weapons. And so coordinating with the Department of Public Works, we worked really hard to remove as many of these vehicles as possible in areas that were hit by violent crime. As we all know, the fleet of DPW was challenged at the beginning of this onset. At the time, they had 6 tow trucks available, which I think got down to 2. We were able to look at existing ordinances on the books and muster up some additional reinforcement from private tow companies to remove as many vehicles off the street as possible. And as of this morning, that number has gone to 254 vehicles removed off our streets that the Department of Public Works have determined to be junk or hazardous. Regarding blight, we know that blighted properties amongst our city, blight is an issue for us. The council has made it very clear that is a priority of the council, but also the administration to get the dirt out of people's eyes. And and when quality of life increases, crime goes down. Particularly when you look at the crime stats and you overlay reports of blight, they go hand in hand. And so working with individual councilmatic districts and offices, and also working with the individual police captains of the districts, addresses that are known to be issues were elevated to the task force to evaluate for abatement. Sometimes the abatement is demolition, sometimes the abatement is fencing, but the confounds of the ordinances and laws are in place. 8020 Olive Street was a car wash that was used in District B in the commission of a homicide in January. Also, we had information to believe that the property was being used for illegal drug use and storage of stolen property. We did an inspection, and the Department of Code Enforcement did their normal process and determined that this property was indeed an imminent threat to public safety and ordered the emergency demolition. The property owner has since filed an emergency order for that demolition to pause, and the order was signed by a judge. It's my understanding that the settlement has been reached between the city and the property owner on how to bring this property back, one, into commerce, but also remedy the public safety risks. So although the demolition did not continue, the ultimate goal of bringing the property to safe condition, I do believe occurred with the fencing and the removing of the barriers, and made it easy to commit criminal activity on this property. The settlement, I believe, is going through the judicial process now, and there's some responsibility on the part of the property owner that if they do not do this, then the city will continue with this demolition. But the Office of Code Enforcement is handling that case. But I know we did a press avail there to talk about the demolition.
Excuse me, Mr. Morris, Councilmember Marino.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, why not initially go in and work with the owner, saying we will tear down your property or take a very aggressive steps on your property if you don't come up with corrective actions, instead of, if they wouldn't have stopped it, the business would have been torn down. And I mean, it seems like finding ways to work with business or property owners is probably the best approach. Why didn't that happen instead of just moving forward with just demolition?
Absolutely. So the Department of Code Enforcement has many abatement tools, right? And I will say this property owner has known about this condition for a while. The city did provide a notice about what the intent was, and it wasn't until we arrived at the property that the owner appeared and said, hey, I'm willing to have a conversation. So there was an opportunity to engage, or an attempt to engage the property owner. The owner is known to the city of New Orleans. But I will say, and later on in the presentation, there's an example of that happening, what you just said, where we actually had an on-site visit with a property owner. And we collectively came to a agreement and that has happened. But in this case, it was elevated and we asked for recommendations of what was the appropriate abatement to remedy the public safety risk. And through the inspections and assessments, it was recommended demolition was the appropriate order. That isn't always the case. Sometimes it is a meeting or a fence, but in this case, demolition was what was determined to be the most appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you. As we know, technology is used as a force multiplier for all of us that work in public safety. We using with the advent and introduction of home cameras and many different surveillance that people have employed to protect their own property, we did identify a resource to get that information to the NOPD much faster. We launched announced that we had joined the Neighbors by Ring program, which pretty much anyone in the city of New Orleans can download the Neighbors app. If you have video footage from any of your systems, not just Ring, but it could be any of the system providers that provide home surveillance, the police department can engage with the resident and information can be provided electronically through the app, as opposed to a burdensome process of a police officer having to knock on the door and canvass the neighborhood. We did hear from some residents that are reluctant to provide information because they don't want their neighbors to see the police knock on their door. But now this is a way where they can provide information or intelligence to law enforcement after a crime has been committed in their neighborhood without fear of people knowing that they've had that particular type of engagement. So again, the city did join Neighbors by Ring. The NOPD detective units and district personnel attended a training on how to use this platform. Next, to Councilmember Moreno's point, I wanted to talk about how some business owners have decided to commercialize violence. At the request of the mayor, she asked us to pay a visit to this merchandise store where the property owner was selling merchandise that incited violence. I have some pictures of the merchandise up on the screen, but I also have some here where this was being sold to our children in our gas stations. And it talks about breaking hearts. There's weapons, there's machine guns. They were selling ski masks. So we paid a visit to the store, and I will say the property owner voluntarily removed all the merchandise from all of the stores citywide because they did not want to contribute to the commercialization of violence. So Councilman Moreno, to your point, speaking with the business owner, this is a huge win. We also, I will say, from an ordinance perspective, we did find in the city charter where there is a prohibition on certain type of merchandise contributing to the delinquency of a minor. I think that ordinance may need to be expanded to include merchandise that incite violence. There's a fine free speech issue there, right? And so it requires some exploration. But we wanted to take this soft approach first to say, hey, this really is not helping us, and the property owner complied. But at the same time, that same conversation, we were able to talk about getting surveillance cameras connected to the real-time crime center and do a holistic wraparound. How can this one particular corner store really help us all be safe and
in that same vein, just a reminder that the council unanimously passed the padlock ordinance as well, which can also be another useful tool when you are seeing criminal activity at businesses. I'm not saying that was occurring in this particular business, but if it is, the chief has that discretion to move forward with the parts of the padlock ordinance to work with the property owner to remedy that situation. I've also had conversations with the district attorney's office that also wants to work closely with the chief on the legal parameters around that, so that it isn't such a tremendous burden on just our law department to do all of those review processes. So just another tool in the tool chest there.
Thank you. Next, we're also emphasizing our existing programs. The city spent a lot of time and energy in creating the Real-Time Crime Center, a large investment. And there's an opportunity there for residents to enrich the intelligence footprint or access to information to the crime center. So I'll give you an example. We have, looking at the data, we have some apartment complexes, one in particular that has had 256 911 calls since January 1. And so myself and some of the task force members will be paying a visit to many of these properties and meeting with property owners to talk about conditions in the complex, talk about surveillance cameras, and can we get them connected to the Real-Time Crime Center, even as far as looking at their parking regulations on property. Do you allow only visitors to park, what happens when a vehicle is here that doesn't belong here, who do you call? So we're really looking to expand and those existing programs and connecting video cameras on private properties to the real-time crime center in areas that we know have spike in crime. I think we've all seen an increase in violence in social media. So right now, while I'm here, Meta, the company that owns Facebook and many other social media platforms, is here in New Orleans. They are conducting a training over the next 2 days. Over 90 law enforcement professionals at OPCD right now, getting trained on the latest and greatest investigatory tools that Meta has available to those of us that work in public safety, trying to prevent, respond, intervene, but also investigate acts of violence. I will say, since the task force has been stood up, I'm now getting all kinds of social media posts that people see, they're reporting, but now we have a place to get that information and get the information to law enforcement for action and investigation. And it's not just the New Orleans Police Department taking part in this training today, it's all of our law enforcement partners from state police and our regional law enforcement partners as well. Particularly around legislative needs and recommendations. Just a couple things that have happened. House Bill 396, sponsored by Representative Delisha Boyd, has been filed for this regular session. And what this does, it closes a major loophole in protection orders. In our evaluation of domestic violence in Louisiana, when a judge issues a protection order, that protection order has to be sent to Baton Rouge for entering into a national database. That staff entering those protection orders does not work after hours or on weekends. So sometimes it's 3 or 4 days before law enforcement even knows that an order has been issued. And we've had instances where individuals will call 911 to report the person who's ordered to stay away has returned. Because it's not in the system, the law enforcement hands are limited. And so this ordinance, or this change in state law requires entry into the registry within 2 hours of a judge issuing the protection order.
I have a quick comment and question on this. So I'm familiar with it.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to have just jumped in there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you actually have 2 legislators up here who worked on comprehensive domestic violence legislation back in 2014, where this originally was put together. I was the lead author, and at the time Senator Morrell was my co-author, who shepherded it through the Senate, where it got very complicated. So what you're doing in this particular legislation is you're reducing the time length in reading the legislation from the orders being entered by the end of the next business day and limiting that to within 2 hours. Now, I think that's good. I think that's key. And I can tell you that back when Senator Morrell and I were in the legislature, we wanted the same. No doubt about it. We absolutely wanted the same. We wanted it done immediately. 2 hours was too late even. The advocate said we wanted it immediately. I wish you would have had discussions with myself or Council Member Morrell about this legislation, because we could have explained to you some of the issues that we had with this. And one is we received great opposition by the Clerks Association, and they explained to us all of the different technological issues that they were facing, and how it was going to be to the point of impossible of getting it done immediately within seconds. That would have been our goal. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that done. So look, if you can get this done, I think that would be great. If we can shorten the time period, it could be great. But I think that while this is important and this is key, I think that there are other bigger issues dealing with domestic violence in our city that are even much more pressing, including something that we can locally control here, dealing with the transfer of firearms. And that's something, again, that myself and at the time Senator Morrell worked on. That is still happening, and you can talk to the health department in a very limited manner. We have very few firearms that are actually being relinquished by these offenders. That's what's getting people killed. That's what's absolutely getting people killed is these offenders still holding on to those firearms. As you know, victims of domestic violence are 5 times more likely to be murdered if there is a firearm in the home. And so I think that like, if we want to talk about like real big efforts that this task force could do on DV, it's on how do we expedite and really make these firearm transfers work. I get it that we're one of the only parishes that's really like initiating this and moving forward with this, which I think is great. But, you know, getting 20 firearms from people annually is like not nearly enough of what we should be getting. So I think to continue to press on that, I think would be key. And I'm sorry, Councilmember Morel, to have jumped in front of you, but
In front of them, that's all right. Ladies,
Like,
ladies first. Councilmember
I'm used to
Morel.
it. I think my assessment's a bit more blunt. This bill, when I saw it up there and I re-looked at it, and Council Moreno and I were talking about our experience getting this bill through the process. This is the exact reason why months ago when this task force was created, we said the way it was created and the rationale behind the way it was created and the exclusion of the council, just the way this legislation was filed was really Bush League. I walked out of here a moment ago and called the head of the Clerks Association. And I said, "Hey, are you familiar with House Bill 376?" She said, "Yeah, we're completely opposed to it. We negotiated with y'all last time. We explained to y'all the challenges of this bill because we always look in this city, we look at our problems through the lens of our court system. There are many parishes in this state where you'll have one court over multiple parishes. The reason why 48 hours, which was a fight to get, sorry, was it 24 hours, 40 hours, 24 hours? Right. The reason why we had to fight to get that is because every court system in the entire state is dramatically different. They have technological limitations, they have physical limitations and the like. What I want to point in the existing legislation and why I really think that legislation is not necessary is it says no later than the end of the next business day. There's no reason why we could not go over to civil district court and tell the judges, we want you to do these things in 30 minutes because they could right now. The language of the law is no later than 24 hours. When you go to the state level to change the law for the entire state, you then have to negotiate with 63 other parishes to see how what you're going to do influences 63 other parishes. And honestly, before I filed any legislation or filed any legislation that affected a specific group, the first thing I did was look at who are the affected parties, who's going to be in opposition, meet with those people, identify the challenges, and try to work around it. I will tell you, in my experience as a legislator, when you file a bill without doing that first, you're basically wasting your time. It's a tremendous waste of time. It's performative. And the thing you're going to get up there is they're going to say, it says no later than 24 hours the next day. Why can't you ask your courts to do it sooner? Because they can.
Councilman, your response? Councilman Morel.
I'm waiting for a response.
Okay.
Mr. Morris.
So
Response.
I want to be very clear. This is not an issue that was presented or that the task force picked up in January. The mayor has a domestic violence working group that meets regularly. It has since I've been here for the past 6 years. The judges collectively that are represented identified this as a barrier. And when we spoke with the Louisiana Protection Order Registry, it was their recommendation that said you need to change the state law to speed up this process. So there's no way did I say, or this task force say this needs to happen. But also, I think it's also important to understand how this process works. Right now, the law precludes a clerk themselves from entering into the registry. The law says they must send it to Baton Rouge, and that is the only entity that can enter into the registry. So the legislation opens that authority up for other agencies that have the training, the technology tools available to enter into the registry directly. Also, but the Protection Order Registry is not unique to Louisiana. It's an FBI file in the National Center for the Crime Information Center. There are standards that are available so if you want to have quick access and enter into the system. Right now, the law precludes us from using those other systems because it says we must use the Louisiana Protection Registry in Baton Rouge. And so the law, although be well intended, it has heightened the strain so much that the individual courts can't make those independent actions.
Two things. First, the reason why we created, like I said, history, the legislature created the protective order registry was so that individuals, as they move between parishes, if I'm correct, Council Vice President, if you got a protected order in Orleans and you went to Jefferson and they called, they could check to see you have an order in Orleans. So the whole reason why we had it was for individuals as they move about the state, that the order could follow them.
It does now. It does without the record.
Correct. However, there is nothing that precludes us locally. If you get a protective order in Orleans Parish, to have that order created as quickly as possible and to have NOPD notify that a protective order is in place. There's nothing that precludes that.
But that also assumes you stay in the parish. But when you have the people who were,
Mr. Morris, we have plenty of problems in the parish of Orleans. And my understanding with this task force is we're solving the problems of New Orleans. I appreciate, because I'm sorry, I keep on calling Representative Moreno. I appreciate, because Council Vice President Moreno and I spent over a decade, you spent about half a decade up in Baton Rouge solving the state's problems. We have significant problems in our parish. Now, what I will tell you is, when I hear judges complain about they need the state law change, it reminds me of my arguments I've had with judges over bail reform. A judge does not need the council to do bail reform to set appropriate bails. I know Mr. Snowden is back there. You can weigh in on this too, but if a judge wants to set a little bail for somebody because they're on a risk, they can do that. They don't need us to tell them that. If a judge wants to expedite protective orders, if the judge wants to work with NOPD to notify them protective orders are signed, if we collectively want to have a local database, we can do that. We don't need a legislative fix. And though I appreciate this was the recommendation of the DV task force and other state actors, if it's their recommendation, why is it on your presentation?
because domestic violence is a contributor to violent crime. This is one area we have found a loophole.
I hear you, but on one hand, if this is a recommendation to solve a state problem, and this is the, as I recall, this is the New Orleans Violent Task Force, we need to have solutions that deal with solving violent crime in New Orleans immediately.
Yeah.
I appreciate tackling state issues. Like I said, I did that for over a decade. But we need solutions that are going to help New Orleanians now.
Yeah.
I don't think, to be clear, the way this bill was filed, I mean, even looking at the committee makeup, I mean, this bill has been sent to House Judiciary, which has some great New Orleans members on it. It's got two fantastic legislators from New Orleans on it. It's got a great Democratic chairman, also has 8 Republicans. So it's got 4 Democrats, 8 Republicans on an issue that I can tell you candidly, from my experience with Council Vice President Moreno, we have had a really hard time getting our guys from across the aisle sometimes to take domestic violence seriously. So I guess my issue is I appreciate 3, because 3 up there is something we can do. But when you talk about looking even at the towing ordinance, the towing law at the state level, you're talking about dealing with the banks, the credit unions, the credit agencies, and the towing companies. And I haven't called them yet, but I'm guaranteeing you that they probably aren't aware that you're doing something or looking at something like that either. I mean, the issue is that if we're going to have anyone in this city, including the domestic violence partners you're meeting with, knows that you had a font of historical knowledge up here when it comes to legislation of DMV and DV, and we could have pointed out the pitfalls and traps to do it. When a bill is filed this haphazardly, you're already walking into a hostile environment. And it's obvious from this conversation right now, there really was not enough research done as to why the law was that way and what the challenges are and how feasible it is to pass that. So I'm more than happy to work with you in my office. I'm sure Council Vice President is as well. to sit with the judges and figure out a local solution we can do without legislative requirements. Because the legislature, you're negotiating with 105 House members, 39 senators. I think half of them are running for governor at this point. When we could have solutions locally that we could do in a week.
Thank you, Council President. I will say this. I think those of us that work in the criminal justice system understand the advancements that technology has made over the last 6 years, particularly with the FBI's national files around protection order registries. Now, I do understand when this law was passed, the registry across the nation was not as robust as it is today. And so today, where most states do it, when the judge issues an order, the clerk literally turns around and enters the protection order immediately into the national protection order registry. So going through parishes, if any law enforcement officer interacts with that person, they immediately have access to that information. That was not the case when the law that you all passed was created, but it is the case today. We started with a New Orleans solution. It was very much an issue, getting 911 calls from people saying, hey, my boyfriend's here and there's a protection order, and we run the name and it does not appear. That absolutely hinders our ability locally to stop violent crime. Councilmember just said 5 times more likely to be killed if you're domestic violence with a weapon. So this is a barrier so the law enforcement officers can intervene.
I appreciate you mansplaining DV stats to me. Well, I've been doing this. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it because it's like, Elena, we didn't know that apparently. Did you know that?
I just said.
I mean, we literally fighting at the legislative level. The two of us have passed more DV bills in our time in the legislature than had been passed or have been passed since. We still have to spend time every year going to the legislature just to protect the bills we passed. I appreciate this is not about technology evolving. I mean, let's be honest, there are plenty of states across the nation that have evolved when it comes to gun registries, gun ownership, and a variety of different topics. And yet the state of Louisiana, historically, you have to drag them tooth and nail to go not just from the 20th century to 21st, but from the 18th century to the 19th century. And what frustrates me is that rather than work with the council to figure out a local solution to address the issue, because this legislative issue, like I said, maybe you're right. Maybe you're going to go up there, cite your stats to a legislative committee. You're going to go talk to the head of the Clerks Association, tell her all the same stats, most of which in Louisiana, I mean, honestly, from our time, they're slightly better than they were, but they're still absolutely horrible in the United States. But you're going to cite your stats and all the political problems are just going to melt away. They're going to melt away because you have you have your stats. And I mean, you've seen this state, whenever you bring up the FBI right now, Justice Department in this state that voted 65% for Donald Trump, they're like, oh man, FBI and Department of Justice, let's get them all access to our information. You're going to succeed where others have failed. I just think it was a tremendous missed opportunity to sit down with the people who've done that fight before and build a path to be successful. It was a missed opportunity and it's just unfortunate.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I second what the council president has said, and I'll just add that I think we as a council united can certainly send a resolution to the clerk of our issuing court asking for that 2-hour timeline, which I think will be helpful to New Orleans. And if the technology that you say is there and available, they should have zero problem with getting that done. So I think that could be a win for New Orleans. I do wish you the very best of luck in the legislative session. I think if you get this passed across the state, I think that would be fantastic. But at the end of the day, let's take care of New Orleans. And I think that we can figure out a path, particularly since you said that technology is already there. So I'm happy to co-author that resolution, hopefully with the president and the rest of the city council. Now, when it comes to all of the different laws that myself and Council President Morrell passed over my close to 10 years, his more than a decade of being in the legislature, The biggest issue that we have with domestic violence in this city and across the state is lack of enforcement of the laws. That's the biggest problem. And until we are a city that's going to take domestic violence seriously, until we have a criminal justice system that's going to take domestic violence seriously, we can pass all the laws that we want, and it's all for naught. So that's what I ask you as the head of the task force to really push on, is the enforcement of the laws that are already in the books. Because I can tell you this, Louisiana actually has some of the strongest domestic violence laws in the nation. And we have that because of the work of myself and Councilmember Morrell and many, many advocates from across the state, some of them from right here in New Orleans. So that's what I ask for, is the enforcement of the laws that are currently in the books. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And just for a point of clarification, the issue is not our local clerks. They send the orders to the Protection Order Registry immediately when the issue is the registry entering it into the registry. But we'll unpack that further as the legislation goes through its normal process.
Continue your presentation.
Thank you. The second piece, when I talk about enforcement of the revised statutes, right now there's a law in the books that says when you tow a car off private property, you are to notify law enforcement that you impounded that vehicle. That is not happening.
So what have you done with the cars that you've towed today?
There have been
254. Where are they? So what's going to happen?
So the junk cars have been taken by the private tow companies and they're following the revised statutes to salvage those properties, noticing the owners that they have a certain time period to respond, but they're at their individual yards. If the vehicle has been deemed abandoned, it is sitting with the Department of Public Works for disposal.
All right, thank you.
But right now, we're finding that on private property, stolen vehicles are being stored in apartment complexes, in areas that are on public streets, and they're being picked up by private tow companies. And what happens is your car gets towed, you call 911, we wait, we don't know the car was towed. We send a police officer burdening the police testifying your car was towed. So we need to enforce the existing statute on the books about reporting to us when a vehicle is towed. But right now, the current statute says that you have 24 hours. I'm not asking for a change in state law here. What I'm asking for is for the council to consider shortening the time period that a private tow company has to notify us that they have impounded a vehicle. So we can run the plate to see if it's been wanted in the commission of a violent crime. We can run the plate to see if it's stolen, because 24 hours is just too long. Also, it burdens police, sending police officers out to take stolen vehicle reports for cars that were not stolen. They were towed. And so I'm asking council to consider passing an ordinance to shorten that reporting requirement. And speaking with the New Orleans Health Department, as you know, they are developing at the request of the council and the task force a public health violence interruption strategy. Dr. Vegno provided her updates to the group. They're listed in the presentation, but she's been working with many of our evidence-based violent prevention strategies and trying to find funding to fund those initiatives. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention is looking to restart their hospital violence interruption teams and securing funding for that. Working also with Children's Hospital and launch comprehensive gun safety storage education that we heard as a need from our community, and also the presentation right before mine, and for the public distribution of gun locks and other safety devices. And finally, the health department worked closely with the NOPD, the administration, and this council to strengthen the penalties for individuals who carelessly store firearms that lead to the injury of a minor. When we talk about our schools, we know the schools are the anchors of our community. The Orleans Parish School Board has several initiatives happening around school truancy to make sure our children remain in school when they're supposed to be there. They're also drafting a student safety policy to include the requirement to install the Rave Panic Button applications at all of our schools. So when there's an incident of violence or a threat, we can communicate with the school officials expeditiously. Also, the health department and local providers are expanding services around mental health services for our children, and also working with nonprofits to partner with the Center for Restorative Approaches and Ceasefire programs. Next, the task force has taken our work to the ground, meeting with many of our city council members. We've done community walks. I've done them with Councilmember Thomas in District E around Cindy Place, where we all the department heads gathered and did pretty much a community inspection. And we've gotten buildings demolished, vehicles removed, and we've seen particular areas that were once hotbeds for crime become not necessarily dormant, but calm down quite a bit. I'm meeting tomorrow with Councilmember Giarrusso to walk in the Mid-City area around the Tulane in the Claiborne area. We have some walks coming up in District B. And so we're taking these where the data is telling us we should go to address quality of life issues in one fell swoop with all the city resources with us. Next, we're looking at the apprehension tools for the New Orleans Police Department. The superintendent's crime prevention strategy plan talks about efficiency and innovation, as well as recruitment and retention. But we're talking about robust additional K-9 units, drones, technology, also the evaluation if an aviation unit is necessary in the city of New Orleans. Again, these are things that we are exploring with the help of the NOPD and the superintendent's office. They know the city just purchased a helicopter to be used for multi-purposes, and so can that aid us in our crime fighting work across the city. Finally, Councilmember Thomas and I attended one of 4 roundtable sessions with the youth that are currently in custody at the Juvenile Justice Intervention Center, just to hear from the youth about what life was like just prior to them committing the crime, and also an understanding of what life is going to be like for you when you get out of the JJIC. And we overwhelmingly heard from the youth that they need structure, they need guidance, they need love, but they do not. A lot of them cannot return to the environment they left because they will recidivate. And so we look at opportunities for our youth to go. Our options for transitional housing are very limited. State resources are limited there. And so we right now are doing an assessment of city-owned property to see if we can stand up some transitional housing for those youth that get released from JJIC, or at the recommendation of the schools, that they have a family that is in imminent crisis and the child needs to be not necessarily removed from the household, but placed in a more stable environment before an act of violence happens, that we have a place for them to go. Again, the Office of Gun Violence Prevention is similar to the Community Emergency Response Training, the CERT program. They are looking to deploy across the city a violence interruption training certification program for residents who are interested in learning how to be violence interrupters in their own communities, but also clergy. We've heard some members of clergy, they need training, they need guidance. They absolutely have resources and facilities, but the Office of Gun Violence Prevention is exploring curriculum now and looking for trainers to come in and provide this robust certification and training program. Again, I mentioned earlier using the 911 calls for service when we have a spike in public safety use. Doing a site visit with the property management at these large apartment complexes to address access and environmental concerns that contribute to violence. Again, I've spent some time at 6,000 Chef. I'm going to a couple places this week in New Orleans East. And what I'm finding is that property owners are more than willing to come to the table with resources, but they need the city to meet them halfway as far as enforcement, but also connecting their cameras to the real-time crime center. There were some barriers there around what type of cameras we're looking to explore the type of feeds that can come into the center. And finally, bringing critical services to community. We've heard from our residents that the emergency services, the things that stabilize families, emergency food, housing, rental assistance, if they have any transportation issue, getting to City Hall to access those services is difficult. During COVID, we did deploy city services to our libraries to make it more readily available and accessible, to see if that model will still work, bringing the services for people who we say needed the most to them on the ground. So we're exploring a model now to bring those city wraparound services that are designed to stabilize people in an emergency or a crisis to closer to where they are. When we hear from those that have committed acts of violence, in a lot of cases, it's crimes of desperation. And so if we can remove the desperation, the intent is to remove the criminal element as well. Finally, I think it goes without saying, from the discussion today, I think all of us here are committed to reducing violent crime, but it's going to take all of us to have difficult conversations around perspective, but also get to a place where we can move forward together and commit to a plan moving forward. I will say the New Orleans Police Department is the bread and butter of keeping our streets safe, but they can't do it alone. And I would say, I know if they come to the council for resources, I would ask from the task force perspective, they are augmented in their tools and needs from a budgetary perspective are provided. We as leaders got to be bold. We got to be innovative, think outside the box. The conditions on the ground that we see today are not the same conditions we saw yesterday. And finally, this spike in violent crime didn't happen overnight. So I hope no one thought I was coming today to say, hey, we've solved all the violent crime. It was never going to be the reality. But I will say, I do think that
No, I was. Yeah, I was hoping you would come in and say it's done. I'm gonna hope that every day. I'm hope every day we get together, every day we wake up. And the expectation is gonna be that nobody dies. Nobody gets hurt. So I hear you, but no, the expectation is gonna be every day that we're the safest city, that children aren't dying, that people aren't dying, and women aren't being, and families aren't being abused. And so, you know, I know you're making your comments, but know that for me, that's the expectation every day.
understood, sir, and I appreciate that, and we share that. But I had the balance and realism. That's it. It's a difficult work, and we're committed every single day. And I will say, the council members' offices that have engaged the task force on a daily basis, thank you. They have been invaluable to this process, giving us information as we move through the city. And finally, we're all working together for a safer New Orleans. And with that, I can take any questions.
I got something.
Councilmember Morrell, and
Anita, you have a slide for me?
then we have several speakers in the audience that want to address this issue.
Okay, let me explain what this slide is. This, I understand, on your slide deck, I want to say it was slide number, let's see, two sides, so let's say 1, 2, slide number 1, 2, 3. Slide number 3, you have the year-to-date violent crime numbers with this very impressive reduction in violent crime. What that is, that red number is the gone on arrivals. I think that it's important for us to acknowledge the people of the city whenever we publish numbers saying, oh man, violent crime is down. They're like, well, I'm still getting shot or stabbed or mugged. The reality is that if you follow that chart, and I know my council data nerd over there knows the charts better than I do, violent crime, as we understand it, has not necessarily gone down substantially. It's just that you don't have a lot of people that are willing to wait. I think on average, depending on what it is, even the response time for violent crime is higher now than it was last year. Is that correct?
I did not evaluate the police department.
Okay, well, I can give you, I can give you the numbers. On 1 second.
But looking at this chart, it's difficult to talk about the gone on arrivals. What incidents were reported? Are they instances of violence, or are these all collective?
Oh, these are violent crimes. So let's see. So on average, violent crimes are also receiving. Okay, so the average response time to a violent crime incident in January, February, and March 2023 was 79, 67, and 106 minutes respectively, up from 57, 56, and 84 minutes on average in those 3 months for violent crime. For non-violent crime, the response time averaged 161 minutes, 151 minutes in January, 155 minutes in February, and 165 minutes in March, up considerably from 139, 133, and 156 minutes on average for the first months of 2022. Whenever you throw out data and you rely upon data to make representations of the public, you have to present all the data. And we know from last year when we had this huge, multiple council meetings on it, about how it is important to acknowledge the fact that with our dwindling police force and other challenges, as response times continue to climb, there is a growing number of people that, due to the situation they're in, the environment they're in, or a variety of other pressures, they're not willing to wait forever for the police to show up. And it's important that we acknowledge that potentially, more than likely, a crime occurred. It's just the person, the victim, wasn't willing to hang out. And I get very, as you can tell, a little perturbed when we continue to try and paint rosy numbers without that acknowledgement. when you look at that tremendous growing gap of going on levels, we should not mislead the public to believe that they are necessarily less likely to have an aggravated battery, aggravated assault, aggravated rape, simple rape, armed robbery, or simple robbery this year than last year. It is more likely that if one of those things happens, you got to wait longer for a police officer. And depending on how traumatic the incident was, you might not be willing to wait that extra 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes. I will say, however, based on the analysis of our council data researcher, carjackings are in fact down by all metrics. But as far as all the rest of violent crime, the going on the arrivals continue to grow. So on those where we respond, yeah, there's less of them, but there's a amount that take place where by the time a police officer shows up, the person's not there, and we do a very poor job of acknowledging the fact that if someone reports that they were robbed and we show up 45 minutes, an hour later, they may not still be on that street corner that a robbery did take place.
I don't want to cut you off and make sure you were done.
I'll wait for your response unless I'm done yet. Okay.
Okay, so again, looking at this chart as it is, this does not tell me much about the information. This tells me the instances that a call was marked up GOA. So I can't articulate to you that what this chart means. If you were to break it out by incident type and priority and time lapse, so we can really see what was reported to 911, like a shooting in progress marked up GOA, yes, that's a challenge, but I don't think that's the reality. But again, I have always been willing to come to the table to look at the data, and we can all walk away with the same shit in music. But what I can't do is come today, throw up a chart, and you expect me to give you an answer as to why that thing is red, because I can get an answer, but
you gave us a slide with all these numbers saying -8%, -21%, -9%, and you presented with us with none of the supporting data that says why these numbers are this way.
well, I think that's a little misleading, right? So the source of that data is at the bottom of the presentation. I think you all get it every Wednesday when the police department puts it out. The information comes from their public facing information.
But that chart is on the council dashboard.
Okay, but again,
which is also data pulled from the New Orleans Police Department.
Right. Okay, so but you can't, if I ask you right now, how many of these GOAs are shootings?
I think that perhaps rather than showing up with your numbers and linking to a website, maybe, Mr. Chairman, we should get Mr. Asher here with a list of his numbers and we can compare. What I dislike vehemently is when we try to have a political rosy picture without the caveat that the picture might not be as rosy as people think.
I don't think
the gone on arrival situation, which was egregious last year, has gotten worse. Is that true or false?
From this chart,
you are the head of the Orleans Parish Communication District.
Yes.
When someone reports a crime, do you track as to whether or not an officer showed up with an RTF or going on arrival?
We enter the information into the system. Do we analyze that data? No. The police department does.
As the head of the violent crime task force, do y'all study the requests for the follow-ups and going on arrival and the discrepancy?
No, we're not. What we're looking at right now is
that's a problem.
Okay. Well, what we are looking at is the information presented to us by the New Orleans Police Department of confirmed crimes that have been reported and reports that have been taken. I'm not gonna allow us to sit here and say someone's been shot and because they didn't want to wait, they got up and left. That's not the reality. If someone say is involved in a shooting and they end up at a hospital police will call us and a report is taken. It's not necessary where
we had testimony and anecdotal evidence last year of people who were actually raped, decided not to wait for an hour. So what you're saying is that if a rape victim doesn't want to wait, I mean, I'll give you my own anecdotal information, from when I witnessed a drive-by shooting. I think there are a tremendous amount of people who witness or are victims of crimes who we don't do a good enough job doing follow-up. And because we as a city do not do follow-up, that does not mean a crime didn't occur. It means that we held people to an unreasonable timeline. And I think that if we're gonna take the time to pat ourselves on the back about dropping numbers, we need to make sure the numbers actually dropped. Because if officers are not able to respond timely to violent or non-violent crimes, and because of that, a crime is reported, but there is no follow-up because the person was not present, we cannot as a city take the position of, well, if that person didn't wait 2 hours or an hour or 45 minutes, there was no crime. Your numbers are based upon those gone arrivals never existing.
But the gone arrivals are not elements in the major categories of violent crime, the murders, the shootings, and the stabbings.
So you're saying simple rape and aggravated rape are not violent crimes?
No, when I'm talking about the immediate threat to life safety, right? When someone may be shot and ultimately murdered, right? We cannot paint this picture as if the police department or myself or anyone is trying to paint a picture. We are presenting information compared to prior year. I'm not telling you what the information on here is not accurate. What I'm asking for is an opportunity to get a little more detail so I can speak with a little bit more intelligence.
Not to belabor the point, Mr. Chairman, I think that it would be worthwhile to bring back in Jeff Asher, have him present the information on the growth of gone on arrivals, and to allow Mr. Morris the opportunity to respond to it at that time. And everyone can have the same data beforehand, and we can have a nice conversation about it. I think that that would be a best use.
We'll do that at the next meeting.
Okay, my point about Mr. Asher and his data could be him and myself have agreed that we need to meet to ensure up that we understand the data we're looking at, that what I means and J means and P means, that it means the time lapse of the crime.
I am more than happy to facilitate that if it's necessary to facilitate it.
I think it is.
Councilmember Moreno, then Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to get a better understanding of just how the task force operates. If you could kind of walk me through how often do you all meet, first of all?
Right now, we're meeting about every 2-week basis
Okay.
as a whole. But there are individual task force members I meet with on a daily basis.
Got it. Okay, so the whole task force meets every 2 weeks. What about agendas or minutes from the meetings? Where can I find those? Are those available?
We definitely have agendas available. We do not keep meeting minutes, though. It is a discussion amongst agency heads. It's not a dictation. I mean, it's just as if a staff meeting was happening, but we do have agendas.
Okay. If you could send me those agendas, that would be great. I definitely would.
Sure. And I just want to, as a matter of record, I know you made that request before. I did ask for an opinion because I've on the agendas that actually lists physical addresses. And so I was looking for some guidance on should that be redacted or not. I have my answer, so I'll be sending you the information.
Wait, go back. So the agendas have physical addresses of who?
If there's a property that has had a spike in violent crime or we believe is a contributor to crime, the address to discuss is listed. And so before I made that information public, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, one, breaking the law, two, that it wouldn't put anyone else at risk if people knew or would jeopardize an existing investigation if the public knew we were looking at a particular address that we know has had a spike in violent crime. But I have my answer now, so you'll get the agendas.
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I mean, it's like I talked to whether it's the chief or other members of NOPD leadership about properties where there is, a spike in crime all the time. And it's not divulged to the public. If you're worried about it being, a concern over a public records request or something like that, talk to the city attorney's office to see if there's a potential to make that privileged, but still send it to the council members. I think particularly to the district council members who are not on the task force, they'd probably like to know if there are specific properties in their district that are being discussed during the task force meetings.
Absolutely. And again, I did just that and I got my answer from the city attorney's office. So I will provide the information as requested.
Okay, thank you. Tell me about the data. You talked a little bit about the data. Tell me about the data that you're collecting, what you're looking at. How does that work?
So again, like I mentioned before, we really look at the data the police department puts out every week. to see overall as a city instances of violence and what's happening, but we also look at calls for service data. You know, how many times have we come to this particular address? Again, I mentioned the property at 6,000 Chef. We have been there 120 times this year alone. So that immediately sent a trigger to say, what's happening here? We have another property out in New Orleans East 256 times since January 1. So looking at those instances of just what kind of demand is it pulling on public safety agencies and understanding the why behind that. And so we also, when we look at, for example, the major offense log that comes out every morning, when of all the major crimes that happen last 24 hours, sometimes we start seeing repeat information. When we have a particular instances of violence that happen in a small geographic location, we know I met with the Office of Gun Violence Prevention staff that says, hey, can we help understand what's happening here? They go out and speak to the community, speak to the families, they speak to the witnesses that are on the scene to see if we can understand a piece that maybe someone else is missing. So when we talk about data, it's definitely driven around calls for service. But I will say more recently, the public has come to us to say, hey, we're not necessarily getting to that high level, but if we keep going down this path, we may get there. So can we have a conversation beforehand? And so we are starting to have those conversations. We also, some members of the community that have experienced violence. I know one particular parent who lost her child to gun violence reached out to the task force to say, hey, I need a support group. Where can I go? And although that particular piece doesn't necessarily stop violent crime, but wraparound services, it was important to us to be able to get that person to the services they needed.
So I'll say this, like what you just explained is actually good information and necessary information that the public should know about. I think that's a really good key role of the task force to look at different areas of the city where for example, I think you said you had over 250 calls for service for one particular area. And it's like, how can you put all different types of city resources around what potentially could be happening in that area? I think that's good. Because I'll say this, like looking through your presentation, what you showed us is really presentations that we've already seen from other city departments. Like we've already seen these, like we know about the violence intervention stuff from the health department. We talk to safety and permits all the time. We talk to the district attorney on some of the things that he's doing. I mean, so we've seen all of this and you know, I feel like you're kind of a meeting spot, which is fine for all different stakeholders to come together and kind of explain what they're doing. I think it's fine. I think that's good. I don't think that's exactly how the task force was, you know, portrayed to be or set up to be when the executive order was put together. But I think that it's good. I think it's fine for all city departments to come together and talk about public safety. I think more should be included, to the chairman's point about bringing all different city departments, including whether it's workforce or whether it's Office of Supplier Diversity, all to the city council, explain like, how are you helping with the public safety issue that we deal with this? I think it's long overdue that all different types of stakeholders and city departments come together and have these discussions. You know, I think we wanted something to work a little bit more urgently, not, you know, bi-monthly every 2 weeks, but I get it. Let me also ask you though about council participation. When this was initially formed, there were no council members who were part of it. 2 council members were then added to the task force, which I think is great, including our chairman and council member Harris. So what about the other council members? I heard, you know, that apparently the mayor called for the rest of us to participate. Like, are we supposed to be at the meetings, not at the meetings? Like, I'm confused by that.
So council member, immediately upon the task force being created, I reached out to every single council member directly and asked for a meeting. Those meetings happen with council members or their staff, with those that took me up on that offer. And by all means, we will continue to do that. I know particularly we work with individual council members daily in some cases around issues in their particular districts. I mean, just tomorrow, you talk about surrounding state departments. We got a 4-block radius. We're hitting tomorrow in Councilmember Drusso's district with every state department tomorrow to walk it and see what we can do to calm this area down. And so I don't know. No, there's not an expectation for council members to attend a meeting. I think the council members that are there represent the will of the council very well in that regard. But we can provide updates to council members as you all see fit, or if the task force needs to engage in your district, then we will engage.
Because I'll say this, because I felt like there was almost like a calling from the mayor, from the rest of us to participate. And I certainly don't want to miss that calling. And the direct quote was from the mayor, understand that the entire New Orleans City Council can participate in any committee meetings that are held, meaning by the task force. That's the responsibility of the New Orleans City Council. is
Well,
what she
Mayor,
said.
Council Vice President, let's give the whole quote, right? So the question that was asked to the mayor was, can the council participate in this meeting today? And
What
her,
meeting?
the one we're in right now,
Well, it's our meeting. So why
our
would we
Criminal
not be
Justice
allowed to
Committee meeting,
participate?
right? And so the question was asked at the press conference at Olive Street, can the council participate in that meeting? And her response was, any council member can attend that particular meeting. That was the response.
Okay, so can any council member, let me ask you the question again. Can any council member participate in the task force meetings?
You know, Councilmember Moreno, I've said over and over again that we absolutely can be inclusive, right? Everyone, every stakeholder wanting to aid in the reduction of violent crime deserves a seat at the table. From a policy perspective, I think the council is represented, but if you or anyone else wishes to attend a meeting, we can have a conversation, but I will not allow the meeting to be derailed or destructive. And so what that means is that we have agendas. I just ask that people stay on task. And that,
Let me be very clear to you. Let me be very clear to you.
please,
The meetings that you are having, there is nothing that can lead you to prevent me from coming to that meeting. Let me start there. Now, if I am not welcome, I get it. It appears that I am not welcome.
That's not true.
Then but you pretty much just told me I'm not welcome.
well,
to your meeting.
let me answer the
Much
question more clearly then.
You just accused that I would derail
I didn't
your
say
meeting.
you,
I'm certainly not going to derail your meeting.
Councilman Moreno.
I made suggestions to you as to things that I would like the task force to consider. And if my office participated in these meetings, if we were welcome at these meetings, we would offer additional assistance to, move forward different initiatives that we see potentially lacking.
Yes.
And I think that those are voices that potentially would need to be heard, but I get it. No, you've made yourself clear. You don't need to do any more explaining, and I appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Okay, with all due respect, Councilman Moreno, I think just like everyone in these chambers, these public chambers has the opportunity to speak completely and give full thoughts. Let me be very clear. My comments are in no way directed to you at all. And so if that is how they were perceived, then that's my apologies. But what I will say is that just the mere fact that we keep mentioning that the council was not included on the initial creation of the task force. Okay, we've had that discussion. We talked about the reasons why you thought, and a correction was made, right? And so we made sure that members of the council were represented. That is the mechanism to ensure this body is represented. If we need fuller representation, we can have that conversation. And I understand that I'm in no way in a position to block someone from attending a meeting. I would never do that. But I just ask that anyone attending the meeting allow the meeting to continue.
Before we get to the community cars and everyone has 2 minutes, if there were minutes, the minutes would reflect that my comments at the task meeting were in reference to understanding the hotspots that have existed for the last 30 years, where they exist. If you look at every crime map, whether it's the council crime map, the Metropolitan Crime Commission crime map, or the work done at the police department, very few has changed in pockets of our community, whether it's crime from extreme violence or domestic violence, carjacking, or simple robberies. And one of the things that I recommended is that we look at those hotspots. Why have they been the same for 30 and 40 and 50 years? Why have those pockets of those communities been neglected in terms of how should they be resourced? So I think that the only way the violence reduction happens is if we look at the historical pattern of crime and where crime has happened and who it's happened to. And you'll remember I made that recommendation. And that at the end of the day, the task force come up with recommendations based on what's happening in those communities that have either been neglected or been forgotten. But historically, what are the resources we need? What are the wraparound services we need to go into? So I would hope that a report at the end of the day, or even if this committee is never ending, but at some point, there's a document that's produced that represents the level of violence that's happened in communities for far too long and what we need to interrupt it or stop it. So if there were minutes, those minutes would reflect that I made that comment at our meeting, and I'm expecting that at some point.
Understood. Yes, that is correct.
Councilmember Morel.
Well, I'd like to add, in appreciation to Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Thomas will let you know publicly where those spots are. He doesn't feel the need to hide those addresses. And he, at every meeting, he also is happy to note and show his knowledge by telling us which gangs are out currently and that we should be targeting and should be trying to pull back. So part of the reason why Councilman Thomas is such an effective leader of this committee is that he publicly shares information and encourages people to come to these meetings and publicly sharing information to do buy-in. What is very concerning to me is that the only way we're going to address these issues, and I appreciate our first presenters who came up here and publicly talked about what the solutions were, is we're going to have to invest resources and investment to tackle these issues. How can we do significant investment of money based upon secret meetings that people can't get minutes to? How are we going to take a recommendation from this task force when you're literally telling us you are not going to provide receipts?
Not what I said.
We already have a tremendous amount of people, and rightfully so, who are very upset about how we spent some of the ARPA money without having a public forum on it. Yesterday, we had a very public forum on community ideas on how to spend ARPA money. We are trying to work with people who have real solutions to solve the problems in the city. It is going to be very, very hard to then tell these people, we heard all your ideas, but we have recommendations from this committee that can't give us any addresses or information, and that supersedes you. So I think, Mr. Morris, that you should go back to whoever, the mayor or whoever else, and say, listen, if you want the public to buy into what you're doing, you got to welcome the public in.
Absolutely. And the task force, and I've met with many members of the public. We are talking about doing a public meeting in every councilmatic district.
Mr. Morris, are you the task force?
I am.
No, so you're the task force as one member.
No, I'm the chair.
Okay. The task force is not meeting with the public. You're meeting with the public. What the public wants is an accountable task force where everyone talks to everyone on the task force and shows your receipts as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. You having meetings with people would be like if someone wanted to talk about significant housing initiatives and I said, hey, you can't meet with the council, you just can meet with JP. Let's go sit in a room and hammer this out. Do you realize every news media outlet, I would be on full blast on the front page of Times-Picayune, Councilman Morel having secret meetings with people to decide the fate of hundreds of millions of dollars. The reason why we have public meetings is so that the public can be aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. You are not the task force, you are the chair of it. The task force needs to be a public-facing task force that has meetings where public input can be given. You cannot be a substitute for the task force being publicly accountable.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Morris, before you respond, I'm going to give you a couple of comments to think about. There's some things that we hear growing up, advice, and just think about these two comments before you respond. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at. And then Shakespeare's "Thou dost protest too much." Sometimes, you want to kind of think and just slow down, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong, it doesn't mean that you're right, but think about those two comments. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I will say this to Councilman Morrell. When it comes to resources and processes and what the council can do to fund certain initiatives and projects, the processes that the departments currently have in place to come to this council for budget allocation and the accountability measures will remain in place. The task force there is to make sure that the ends of the agencies are in alignment with reducing violent crime. Now, I hear you, absolutely. The public should have an opportunity for input, to hear from the task force members, and all those things are happening in various different venues. It may not be happening in a cookie cutter packaged way that may be most desirable, but it is happening. And I will continue to ensure in every way I can that the public's voice is included in that.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one more comment, please? Well, as you know, on Monday, April 10th, from 6 to 8 p.m., the New Orleans United Front will have a crime town hall meeting. It would be really impressive if more than you, members of the task force, could show up and make a presentation to them as to what you're doing. Honestly, from my perspective, we have every agency that is in the task force has a variety of asks from this council to reduce crime. The problem you're going to run into is that on one hand, you've got a secret committee that is coordinating to fight crime. And in that coordination, they're coming up with solutions to fight crime. Then they're going to come to the council and present their solutions to fight crime. The council then has to look and say, well, how did you get to this idea that is so out of the box? And they're going to say, well, we had a task force meeting on it. And at that point, I can tell you as a council member, whatever that idea is, I'm going to say that's the fruit of the poisonous tree. If you're having non-public meetings to coordinate your response to crime where the public can't have any input, I mean public, I don't just mean the people in this room, I mean all of the nonprofit organizations, all of the good government organizations, all of the groups need to have accessibility and accountability to what's being done. I think that there are a lot of people that have grave concerns with the different things the council has done and the lack. There are people who have had grave concerns at things this council has done at the behest of the administration to fight crime. I'll give you an example, facial recognition. I'm going to give you, we get the report, so I'm going to tell you something right now. The council took a very, 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 very difficult vote regarding facial recognition about how it was going to be the super solution to solve all crime. In Q1 of 2023, there were 5 facial recognition requests. 1 was with us and wasn't approved. 1 matched, no arrests. This council took it upon faith by the administration and a variety of non-public organizations that this was an absolutely necessary thing that we had to have. And thus far, we have no proof that's actually done anything. When you talk about now, we've now grown these non-public advisory groups to now a violent crime task force that's going to ultimately make recommendations probably going into the next budget season on money and on policy. It is going to be very difficult for this council going forward to accept the recommendations or innovations or policy or anything on faith when you don't have receipts. And the receipts are not you walking a neighborhood and talking to some neighbors. The receipts are what were the discussions at these violent crime task force meetings? What were the ideas? What were the solutions and how did you get there? And if we don't have that information, I think it's doomed to failure. I'm just going to be candid. I think that I think it's great you tore down some buildings. I think it's great you towed some cars. I've been working with Leslie Harris for a year. She's been asking for those cars to be towed and those buildings to be torn down. Mr. Green, Mr. Thomas, Mr. King, they've all been saying, tear these buildings down, tow these cars. For the violent crime task force accomplishments to be, we tore down those buildings and towed those cars. You've been reporting a 301 for a year. That's not a Do you want a cookie?
Mr. Edward Parker, 2 minutes.
Good morning. Blighted housing, Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris, blighted housing. We've got 2 on our block. Could I give you the addresses, please? 7830, 32, it's a duplex. Henley, Henley Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70126. The other is 7840, 42 Henley, 70126. We also have 4 abandoned cars that we've been trying to get rid of forever. There's a black Honda. That's at 784042 Henley. There's a black Audi, the license plate ZER964. That's at 783032 Henley. And there's a gray Nissan Altima, no license plate. That's at 783032 Henley. And we've been trying, I even have the, what does the numbers that 311 give? Do you need that? All right, 783032 Henley. You ready?
Can you write them down so that, can you give them to him?
All right, I'll
Pass
tell you
them
what,
to him.
I'll give it to him later.
I mean, are you using your public time when you could just
Yeah.
present it to him? Okay. I'd like to comment on the removal of vehicles, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm trying to be polite.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just want to comment, and
Thank
I
you,
will
Mr.
say
Parker.
this, there have been some challenges, but I do want to say that at the end of the day, that number of 54 for District D, I want to applaud the task force for getting done whatever we requested in terms of vehicles. What I would like to say with the public is, I don't understand why people are leaving their vehicles when they get tired of them, because that's what a lot of it is. It's not just stolen vehicles. They come up as people who've simply taken off the VIN number and taken off the ID and taken everything out and left it there. Call one of the entities that will take your vehicle and give you a receipt so that maybe you can use it on your tax returns. We know about some of the vehicles that work with individuals who are in certain situations where they need help. But what we found, unfortunately, with that 50 or plus is that I wish that they were stolen. No, it's people who have said, I've had enough with my vehicle. It doesn't work. I'm gonna leave it right here on the certain street, on People's Street in darkness and the like. But I want to thank the task force in that regard in terms of vehicles. I have some other comments at the end after public comments, but because somebody may say what's on my mind, but that's a very significant development that's taking place that I think wasn't drawing enough attention. And I think that just like you got a vehicle you moved on yesterday that we asked, I think that that is a very positive development relative to especially our communities that have a lot of blight.
Thank you.
Mr. Charles Amos.
How you doing? My name is Charles Amos. And one of the things I think could greatly help crime is incentive wages increasing. I believe that $7.25 is not enough for anyone. And me as a kid, if my mom does not have the resources to provide for me, then I'm gonna get it on my own. I mean, it's just how it is. And even at $10 an hour, it still isn't sufficient funds to survive. So my thing is, please do something with minimum wage. It has to increase in order for crime to decrease. And I'm not saying that it's just gonna happen immediately, but that's an area that we really do need to start focusing on, minimum wages. Thank y'all.
No, thank you, Mr. Amos. Mr. W.C. Johnson. And I want to thank the speakers too, man. Everybody has been at it within that time. We appreciate it. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. W.C. Johnson. I think what we witnessed here today is probably the biggest problem with crime going on in this city today. And that is all public officials have not bought into doing what's necessary in order to attack the problem. It seems as if the mayor's office is not serious about addressing the crime problem. This gentleman here is sitting here making excuses or giving us a flim-flam answer about what is and what isn't. But he can tell us that the NOPD bought a helicopter. And to me, that is an abuse of public money. We need to have people who are accountable in this city. And obviously, the mayor's office isn't. Now, we have the chief of police here. And I would like to say to her, if she's serious about approaching and attacking crime, she needs to get her own plan. The plan that the mayor is putting forth is not working. And personally, it can't work because it's not all inclusive. You have a crime commission, but you have no public people on there. So how are you going to come to a solution when you're not asking the people who can resolve and solve the problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Wilson Oden.
Hello, my name is Will Snowden with the Vera Institute of Justice. Real quick, Councilmember Harris, the Vera Institute has an initiative to end girls' incarceration, which recognizes that our young girls are one of our fastest growing populations in our jails and prisons. I'll send you some information for opportunities to connect. Additionally, we were able to provide a 911 calls for service analysis at your request, Councilmember Thomas, both last year in April and in October. We're more than willing to continue to provide that analysis because I think when we're looking at that data, we can really understand what New Orleans police officers are responding to, but also what New Orleanians are calling help for. We've shared this information also with Mr. Morris, and we're happy to share it with the chief of police. When we think about this issue of police not having low enough or quick enough responses to incidents of violence, one of our approaches can understand that looking at the data, more than 300,000 calls to 911 came through in 2021. About 70% of those calls were for what are categorized as public order maintenance. So not necessarily incidents of violence. I want to lift this up because we can actually do two things. We can deploy officers to things that they are trained to be deployed and respond to, while simultaneously deploying other teams who are better situated and trained to be responsive to those issues. The last thing that I'll share in Mr. Morris's presentation, there is some synergy between the things that he was able to present and some of the things that we presented yesterday regarding our requests for investments from ARPA funds and fund balance. Specifically, those things are investments and access to more transportation, food stability, housing support, and support for the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So as we're having these conversations about how we're approaching and tackling violent crime, I just want to highlight those synergies between the things we lifted up yesterday and some of the things that Mr. Morris lifted up today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Those are solutions. Ms. Tony Jones.
Hello, my name is Tony Jones. I am representing New Orleans Community Oversight Police. This task force presentation kind of struck me as a bit unserious. And I think like one great example, and this may not have been the task force that led this, but I'm hearing a similar type of approach from this task force as NOPD had with the situation on Claiborne Avenue. I live in the Treme, and you know, as we all know, recently they started shutting down Claiborne Avenue, and you know, I'm expecting this to be coming from a place where you know, violent crime is up or something like this. But when I went to Council Member Freddie King's town hall, you know, we have the first district police officers telling us that crime is down 7%. Yet they're coming out of nowhere and shutting down kind of like Black public life. You know, this is like disrupting commerce, it's disrupting life. And then when you ask them, or when I ask them, well, how long is this happening? They have no time frame. And so how this, I'm seeing this replicated in the task force, is that all the solutions proposed are all aesthetic. It's things like proposing commercialization of violence, broken window policing, you know, saying that apartment complexes are the basis of this violence. Well, to me, all that, to my ears, I'm realizing that the pattern is what is being pinpointed as the basis of violence is Black people, that we're using all these different terms and signifiers for crime when really, you know, all these solutions, I'm seeing a pattern of just harassing Black people and it not being correlated to any data. Because like with the situation on Claiborne, there's no time frame for how long this police crackdown is going to happen. There's no data to support the crackdown, and all of those answers I'm getting are, well, it's rowdy and disruptive. So I think we really have to look at a perspective that that isn't just about harassing Black people.
No, thank you very much. Nikki Wills. I mean, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. And Zeke Wills. Thank you. Please forgive me.
Give you, especially because Jasmine Thomas is my niece.
Yes.
But I'm here. My name is Ezekiel Wilts. I am representing Voters Organized to Educate /Vote. And I just stand here as a single parent with children that's in this community, also as a school teacher of 25 years for Orleans Parish Schools. Recently, we have well, often we're in the communities and we wear many hats in those communities. I have been constructing like a activity, let's say a coalition to clean up New Orleans East to support the cleanup that's going around across the community on Earth Day. That's on the 22nd of this month. And I would like to invite everybody, anybody, bring your friend, your neighbor, your relatives out, because we have been partnered with other organizations as well as the school. St. August one, trying to get some charter schools finalized in New Orleans East. We'll start as Chef and we'll go all the way through to the Wire. Usually where there's a lot of prostitution going on. I lived in that community right around Dowman and the Wire. And we'd like to invite NOPD out there. Our children will be out there. We want our children to see their presence. Back when I was in school, there was a such thing called officer friendly. These children need to know that they still have officers that care about them, and let those officers show that they are friendly and they are in the community. So on April 22nd, I hope to see them there. This is an invite, it's not private, and we want to see you there if possible.
Thank you, Auntie Wills.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Kim Ford.
Hi, greetings, council members, everybody that's on the dais. God bless you for having this open meeting. And this is the only chance that we get to see as a public, but true public engagement. And I appreciate that. But also, okay, so I'm Kim Ford. I am the current co-chair of the New Orleans chapter for the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And I also, which does not pay, that's not a paid gig, but I need to get a paid gig. So I'm coming up to volunteer my services so that I can work with this young man and be able to gain a salary like he does, not equal to his, you know what I'm saying? But to be able to be in a role where some of this money that we give into NOPD can benefit my household. Not only that, to be able to work with them, to show them with my skills as a community organizer, what public participation looks like. It's not to come and sit down so people can just hear what you have to say. It is active engagement and networking with the people who are in your community. And clearly, you're not there yet. So I'm willing to sacrifice my space and my time to come and help you to do that. Because it's not fair that people have to come to the Criminal Justice Committee meeting in order to see you and to talk about what needs to be happening in our community. And I just came from the mayor's press conference that she's trying to give $1 million to NOPD from the wisdom money. So we're not talking about that down here. Oh, yes, unapologetically, she said, unapologetically. So to me, you're going to give $1 million for the police to keep doing the same thing that they've been doing. Nothing has changed there. Nothing has changed there.
Thank you.
So we need to do better, but I want that job though. Hey, y'all, let's use some of this money and help us out because that money needs to trickle down to our community,
Yes.
not just to somebody who's not helping to resolve that issue. We can't police ourselves out of this crime problem.
Thank you. Mr. Chury Clark.
As always, my name is Stuart Clark, always here represent three groups. One of them is Neighborhood Juniors, one of them is Murray, another was the POCC Prison of Kindness Committee. Again, we definitely like to see it okay and to point out, you know, that this guy, you know, is getting paid in the post, you know, that he represents the NOPD, you know, again, they're getting paid to do something that they're not doing, you hear me? And I think, you know, it's high time that this council and those individuals who are the movers and shakers of this particular city address them. Because again, you know, if you got, you know, the NOPD ain't coming out to really in a sense to address serious issues that are taking place in our community. You know, the folks call them, tell them that they, you know, they're dying or they shot up or brutalized and stuff like that, and it take an hour to come out. Somebody's supposed to be disciplined. It just shouldn't be that just, you know, just, oh, it happened, it's so what? You hear me? Somebody should be disciplined. He shouldn't be sitting here. Or whoever is responsible shouldn't be sitting here. I don't care, the chief of police, he should be gone. She should be here addressing that particular issue. Again, we're talking about individuals getting paid to do something that they're not doing. And if you're not doing it, you know, you need to, in a sense, step up, get somebody that's going to be able to do it. But at the same time, you can't be able to not do it and not discipline those individuals responsible for not doing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Ms. Curran, any online comments? Mr. Morris, any parting words?
I appreciate the engagement, council members. I look forward to continued engagement and thank you all for your service.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item on the agenda.
Next item is the motion M23-130 by Councilmember Thomas.
Oh, well, we have one more speaker on this issue? Yeah, come on up.
Yeah, I just really want to address him because
State your name, Mr.
Michael Willis, help other people endure. We got to be held accountable, but we got to get past the deniability part. We keep denying certain things. I watch you show your stats like they spoke about. My stats are different because I've been to the funerals, right? And if we're gonna be transparent, we got to do a better job at being with the transparency. And like she said, we can't be having private meetings on one side, then y'all want something else from the community. The general public don't even know a lot of resources exist. The general public don't know a lot of things exist, point blank. For some reason, I don't know why some people just decide not to put the information out to the general public. My daughter's car was broken in, right? The next day, the people came back to steal it again. No police never showed up. So she dialed 911 and I only speak on stuff that I have facts on. I don't speak on. The police never showed up. So I believe the perpetrator was sitting somewhere around there, realized the police ain't never showed up. We will come back tomorrow night and get it. Guess what they did? They came back tomorrow night. So I'm just letting y'all know, like you said, 911, a lot of stuff like that. We really got to get a better system in place. And I offer my services to help you all. And I told you all, I don't even want the money because I don't fit the criteria to even be in government.
Thank you.
But I'm a general public person. Let me help you all structure some of this stuff to really get us on the right track. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Next item, Ms. Kern.
Motion M 23-130 to present as a representative from the Health Department. Do we have anyone? No?
Health Department? Dr. Avegno's not here? Huh?
No, sir.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Yeah, tell us your name and start your presentation, please.
My name is Benjamin Winger. I'm with the New Orleans Health Department. I am the coordinator for the used to be called the Alternative Dispatch Program, is now called the Mobile Crisis Intervention Unit. I'm here to discuss the amendment for $1.9 million for 2023 to get that passed so we can begin our work. We are about to launch in June of this year, and we will have 3 units, 2 units in the evening, 2 units in the morning and the evening, and 1 unit at night, just working 24/7, 7 days a week, and we'll be responding to behavioral health calls, crisis calls. I'm here to answer any questions.
Councilman Morrell, before he left, said, let you know that he supports this effort. Any other comments from other council members? We need another one to have to pass the motion. Move adoption of the motion, seconded by Councilmember Marino. All in favor? 3 yeas, no nays, the motion is approved. Anything you want to add?
No, this is my first time up here.
But, hey man, thank you for what you do with mobile crisis. It's important. Absolutely.
Councilmember, just wanted to clarify you're recommending approval.
Recommending approval, correct. Any online comments? Motion adjourned. Moved by Councilman Marino, second by myself. All in favor, 3 yeas, no nays. I want to thank the public for a very robust, important meeting. It's important. Thank y'all very much. And thank you so much, man.